Chicago versus New York City. As some of you may know, I recently visited New York City for the first time, but live in Chicago. So in this video, I want to take a non-biased and objective approach in terms of what I thought about New York City versus Chicago. I'll go through all kinds of different categories and tell you which city I thought did better in each category. So let's get to it. So the first topic I want to cover is vibe and pace. The pace in New York City is much faster than it is in Chicago. Everyone always told me growing up that Chicago is fast-paced, but boy, it's nothing compared to New York City. Now, I like fast-paced and high energy, so I felt right at home in that fast-paced environment in New York City. And then in terms of the vibe, I got kind of that rat race vibe in New York City where people are really grinding hard, going after their goals or whatever it is they're trying to achieve in their careers. They're kind of going around the clock, going hard at that. And so being an ambitious person myself, I definitely commend them for that and admire it at the same time. In Chicago, obviously the vibe, people are hardworking here, but I feel like on nights and weekends, people kind of kick back and let loose a little bit more here, maybe as compared to New York City. Now, granted, I was only there for one visit, but that's just kind of the vibe I got. The next one is public transportation. So I flew into LaGuardia Airport and I did navigate public transportation right away, but I will say that I've always grown up thinking that Chicago had really great public transportation, and they do, but New York City just takes that to a whole other level. And to be specific in terms of why, no matter where I was in New York City, I felt like I was only a block away from a train at any given point. And on top of that, the wait times were only like 1 or 2 minutes, pretty much my entire time there. Whereas in Chicago, we do have good public transit, but a lot of times you do have to walk a bit further to get to a train, depending on where you're at. And then a lot of times you're waiting 5 to 10 minutes for a train. As compared to 1 to 2 minutes like you see in New York City. So I gotta give that edge to New York City pretty easily. Next one is cost. As most people know, New York naturally is a little bit more of an expensive city, especially when you live in it. I will say I was a bit surprised though as a visitor, just doing things like going to restaurants or going to places for a drink. It wasn't that much more expensive than Chicago, just a little bit more. So I wouldn't dock it too much in terms of visiting, but obviously in terms of living, there's a huge discrepancy between costs in Chicago versus New York City. Chicago is just much cheaper in that regard. So in terms of costs, I gotta give the edge to Chicago. Next one is cleanliness. Right away, once you're walking around New York City, it definitely feels a little bit dirty. Let's just say that. You know, a huge difference between New York City and Chicago is alleys. So Chicago has alleyways to put garbage and everything, whereas in New York City, they just kind of throw the trash bags on the sidewalk. And while I was there, it was 100 degrees pretty much every day. So you could definitely smell the garbage at certain points throughout the city. I wouldn't say that it was terrible though. You know, especially in major cities, sometimes it's a little bit expected. But I will say this, that Chicago is just a much cleaner city. And I didn't really think, growing up, didn't think it was like that clean of a city until I've gone to places like New York City and then come back and it's like, wow, for being a major city, Chicago is pretty clean. So Chicago takes the cake in that department pretty easily. Next one is nature. This is one I struggle with because one of the first things I did in New York City is I went to Central Park. In granted, in Chicago, our main park is Lincoln Park, but boy, none of our parks here compare or even come close to Central Park in New York City. I was absolutely blown away just by, first of all, how massive it is, but also by how much was going on. I mean, you had people taking salsa lessons in the park. You had skateboarders and BMX bikers doing all kinds of tricks. and in one part. You had live musicians playing songs in another part. And then as you keep walking, there's a fountain there with a little mini lake, and people are canoeing and riding boats in the lake. People are feeding the wildlife, like the turtles in the water and everything. And by the fountain, you actually had French music playing. I felt like I was back in Europe too. So I think in terms of like a park, nothing in Chicago comes close to New York City. However, I will say that seems to be a lot more parks in Chicago, just kind of spread out. They're smaller parks, but just there seems to be a little bit more greenery throughout the city in Chicago as compared to New York. So for this one, I struggle with picking which one's better, because Central Park is just mind-blowing. It's incredible. But we have more greenery throughout the city here, so I'm going to give it a split decision on that one. Next one is weather. So as I mentioned, when I was in New York City, it's pretty much 100 degrees every single day I was there. But it was also 100 degrees or around that back home here in Chicago. So it was just hot. It was summertime. So I do hear, though, in general, the winters are much more milder in New York City as compared to Chicago. I grew up here, though, in those brutal winters. I will say, though, that the winters in Chicago seem to get milder as time goes on. But I will give this edge to New York City just because historically they've had milder winters than us. But in terms of my experience in New York City, the weather was pretty much the same as it was in Chicago. This next one, entertainment. Chicago is just flooded with all kinds of entertainment. You don't have to look far to find it. And I will say that New York City does that and just more. They seem to have a lot more entertainment options and also have more hours of the evening and night. So I got to give the edge to them, especially when it comes to their Broadway plays. And then if you're into comedy, they seem to have a lot more stand-up comedy shows and things like that going on. But this is an area where I think neither of the two cities are a slouch. Can't go wrong with either one, but I'll give the edge to New York City on this. Similar to the entertainment, the next topic is sports, and both cities are really into their sports. Growing up in Chicago, everyone's gung-ho about the Bears, of course, and then people were crazy about the Bulls, especially in the 90s with Michael Jordan. And then we have the rivalry with the Cubs and Sox. It's a fake rivalry, in my opinion. But the New Yorkers, they also are passionate about their sports. And I did go to a Yankees game while I was there. And the Yankees actually rallied late in that game that I attended in the 8th inning to come back and win the game. So I got to experience Yankee Stadium when you have a game that goes in that manner. And I got to see the energy of the crowd there. This is one of those topics, again, where I don't think you could go wrong with either city in terms of sports. But I do have to give the edge to Chicago on this one, just because the atmosphere and energy was much greater, for example, at a baseball game at Wrigley as compared to Yankee Stadium. But, I think you can't go wrong with either one. Next topic, diversity. I think both cities are diverse. With Chicago, there's different neighborhoods for different ethnic backgrounds and also just in general different vibes. In New York City, it's incredibly diverse. And so for a specific example and comparison, when I go to Chinatown in Chicago, I still kind of feel like I'm in Chicago. And granted, there's a lot of Chinese restaurants and things like that. But I walked through Chinatown, New York City, and I actually felt like I was in China and no longer in New York City. And it felt like I entered a whole other different world, and it felt just way more authentic. So I think that while both cities are very diverse, I just got to give the edge to New York City on this one. Next one, architecture. So both cities obviously have great architecture. one of the most enjoyable activities a tourist can do in Chicago is the architectural boat tour. So that's always a highlight of the city. I will say this though, as someone who once studied architecture, I was absolutely blown away by the architecture in New York City and just by the volume of architecture that there was. You know, in Chicago, we have a few buildings that have great architecture, like the Tribune Tower, the Wrigley Building, and even the Merchandise Mart right behind me. But I feel like we definitely lack the volume of unique architecture as compared to a city like New York City. So I definitely have to give the edge to New York City when it comes to architecture as a whole. Kind of tying in with architecture, Skyline. Now, contrary to picking New York City for architecture in general, I do have to say that Chicago pretty easily takes it away here with the Skyline. In my opinion, it's one of the most beautiful skylines in the world. And New York City and their skyline, they do have the Empire State Building and the new One World Trade Center building. But overall, there's just this beautiful flow to the skyline of Chicago. And I think it looks great too at like any different angle. Especially when you're driving in from the expressway at night, it's such an incredible scene. Or if you're flying in on a plane during sunset or at night, it's just a breathtaking view. So I have to give it to Chicago there. So now I saved probably one of the most controversial ones for last, the food. So everyone talks about pizza specifically when it comes to Chicago versus New York. Chicago has the deep dish and New York City has their thin crust. But I want everyone to know that Chicago has a strong thin crust game as well. So when I went to New York City though, I wanted to make it a point to try as much of the pizza shops as I can feasibly. So I tried about 7 different ones. And I gotta say that here's my critique of New York City's pizza. Now, there are a couple great ones I did try, but my critique is in general, I noticed the lack of sauce on the slices. So I do have to knock some points for that. But there were a couple places, in particular Roma Pizza in New York City, that I absolutely loved. And I think that Roma can go toe to toe with any of the thin crust here in Chicago. So I think those were competitive. And then here's another thing, Chicago does square cuts, and New York City does pie cuts. And even though I grew up with the square cuts in Chicago, I do have to say I kind of prefer the pie cut because I like folding the slice and then eating it that way. So, you know, I would say that New York City definitely competes. It comes close to Chicago's thin crust. My ultimate favorite pizza, though, of all time is Arte Pizza Deep Dish on State Street here in Chicago. I haven't had a pizza yet that beats it, but for anyone looking for perhaps the best thin crust in Chicago to compete with New York City, I would suggest Aurelio's Thin Crust Pizza out of Homewood, Illinois. I think that Aurelio's Pizza out of Homewood could probably beats New York City's pizza. So I got to give the edge to Chicago there, but it's close and the two are both competitive. So there's that. So just to wrap this video up, I hope you can see that I was objective. I think for all these topics, it pretty much came to a 50-50 split. Thought half New York City's better at, the other half Chicago. And I actually went into the New York City trip thinking that I wasn't going to think much of the city and that was just going to be a replica of what I live in now here in Chicago, but that wasn't the case. I actually fell in love with New York City. I think it's a whole other world compared to Chicago. And at the end of the day, I love both of them. I don't really want to say as a whole that one's better than the other. I think they just kind of have their own vibes. Like, if you want to just be more laid back and chill and maybe have less options in terms of entertainment, but also be cost effective and things like that, I think Chicago's a great option. And our winters are getting milder, so there's that. But New York City, it kind of just takes things to a whole different level in terms of the energy, the pace, just more entertainment options for sure. Despite me thinking that the food in Chicago in general is better, does seem to be more food options in New York City. So I love both. I can't wait to go back to New York City. And yeah, so that wraps up this New York City series. I hope all of you enjoy it. Let me know your own thoughts and what you think's better pertaining to different topics in the comments. And yeah, as always, take care, stay safe, peace.